The Holy Gospel according to John, the 15th chapter.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus said, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. Every branch that bears fruit, he prunes to make it bear more fruit. You have already been cleansed by the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me as I abide in you. Just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing. Whoever does not abide in me is thrown away like a branch and withers. Such branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, ask for whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
I'm sure you've heard it when we get a good downpour of rain, somebody has to say, "Oh, sorry about that. I washed my car today, so of course it rained." I guess when we get like quadruple that, you hear someone say something like, "Sorry, we planned our first camping trip of the season. We were really looking forward to it, and here we are." No, I think I've been telling a lot of you all, since there's no school tomorrow, we were so excited about a camping trip. Like all weekend, 3 days worth. Even the Saturday night folks gave me the night off. It's great. So we were packed up. We were ready to head out on Friday, and there's that looming threat of storms. All the weather apps were saying, damaging wind, large hail. Okay, fine, we'll wait. Nothing happened, right? So we go down Saturday morning. By later afternoon, there were all those stories of the threats and big storms. And all right, we decided to hop in the truck, leave the camper at the campground, come home, ride out whatever might come. But since Friday's weather fizzled out, we're driving home thinking, what's going to happen? Well, guess I made the smart move. So if you really appreciated this rain this weekend, you're welcome. If you had damage or too much rain, sorry. We'll blame it on Darren. I think he prayed for rain last week in worship, didn't he? You can tell him I said that. So we're hoping to get back down there today and not find our camper in the middle of Lake Truman. But so for like most of you all, our family, hunkered down for the 6 tornado sirens. And the best place for us to do that is here. And this is, I think, like only the second time that we've had to come over here and use this as a safe space for these warnings. And both of those times, we were not alone. Both of those times, there were large groups of people here for one reason or another. And so last night, as Kim and I were watching the radar, we were making a plan of, what would happen. I get a text that there's a school group on their way home from a baseball game, and they needed to wait out the storm somewhere safe. And I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? Well, next thing I know, there's a school bus followed by about 8 cars full of parents, all caravanning down the road, pulling up in front of the church, one after another. It looked like the Colt Camp Fair parade out there. And for the next 30 to 45 minutes, our newest, closest friends were the boys from the baseball team from Butler High School, and all their parents, and a handful of community people that showed up. This is just a fraction of them, all of us hanging out here last night. Offering space, showing hospitality, providing safety. I'm sharing this story not as a thing to say, hey, look what we did, but just to remind us about how deeply and vastly and sometimes unexpectedly We are connected in our world together. And I think about that when I hear Jesus say, I am the true vine. My Father is the vine grower, and you are the branches. So here, once again, in this Easter season, we're hearing stories not from Jesus after his resurrection, but before that, from the last days of Jesus' life on earth, before he goes to the cross. And in the gospel reading we just heard, Jesus has been trying to tell the disciples again about who he is and how everything is going to go, but also giving them assurance that they will not be alone. And he's been doing this through these things we call the I am statements. Images and metaphors that Jesus gives to his disciples to deepen their understanding of what Jesus has come to do and who he is. I think you've heard many of them over the years, but in the past handful of chapters in John's gospel, Jesus has said things like, I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. Last week we heard, I am the good shepherd. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And now, his last one, I am the true vine. All of these images are meant to capture the attention of the disciples and stir their imagination through things that are familiar with them. So again, as we just heard, I am the true vine, my Father is the vine grower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit, and every branch that bears fruit, he prunes to make it bear more fruit. What a timeless metaphor that even we can resonate with today, right? When the branch of a plant is dead or is not bearing the fruit or the leaves or the flowers that it's supposed to do, what do? We cut it off, right? There's no need to keep it on the plant or on the vine when there's a chance that it's taking away the strength and the nutrients from everything else there that's healthy and growing. That seems obvious, but then Jesus takes it another step further. He talks about how God prunes branches even when those branches produce fruit, because the pruning helps produce more. But again, that's something I think we understand, right? So grapevines, for instance, I'm told at least, produce the sweetest and largest grapes when they're closest to the root vine, closest to the source. So even if the branches stretch on and on and on, no matter how many grapes it's producing, it's always beneficial to keep them pruned back and shorter. I get that, right? That makes sense. But in practice, that's really hard to do, isn't it? I think about in the bit of gardening that we do, when we start plants from seeds, we'll drop a few seeds into a single hole, hoping there's a little better odds that something in there will germinate. And if it does, if it ends up that a few or all of those seeds do sprout, you're supposed to pluck up or pick them all except one. Tell me if I'm wrong, please. But to me, when I'm doing that, that's the most nerve-wracking thing to do. I'm looking at them, I'm like, all right, which one of you is going to survive this summer? What if I pick the wrong one? Or how about when we've planted our tomato plants, they're all growing really, really well, and there's all these branches off the main stem, and my gut's saying, look at all this, we're going to have so many tomatoes. But my brain says, yeah, but they won't be as good as if they would be if there were fewer branches. So I get my shears, I go in there and I cut off some of those really healthy looking stems so there's not as much crowding and more nutrients and resources can go to what's there. And I know that's right, but even though I'm still looking at this pile of really healthy looking branches that are now lying on the ground, just second guessing myself. Well, if we carry this vine and branch metaphor into our own lives, we begin to hear Jesus telling his followers, telling us, that we do the best the closer we stay to the vine, the closer we stay to the source. Because apart from that source completely, we would simply wither and be useless. But there's another interesting thing about this metaphor and this I am statement that Jesus says. Like I said, it's just the final one he says. It's the final I am image. But it's also the only time when the I am is followed by Jesus saying, and you are. He says, I am the vine, and you are the branches. Even, and now especially as Jesus is getting closer and closer to the cross, he wants us to see ourselves in this relationship. We, the branches, are connected to Jesus, the vine, who is then rooted in the ultimate source, God, his Father, the vine grower. And so it is through Jesus that we remain connected to God. As I said before, when we disconnect ourselves from the vine, we lose the root of who we are, and we wither away and become useless. But then even when we remain connected, the further and further away we grow from the vine, from the source of all that love, the more likely it becomes that we need to be pruned and not fully know and embody and experience that love. Because that's what that source brings us, right? The passage we heard from 1 John reminds us of what we're rooted in. It says, "Beloved, let us love one another because love is from God. Everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, for God is love." We are called to love. We are called to remain rooted in that love through Jesus Christ. We are called to abide in God's love, showing that love to all whom we are connected. And as we see time and time again, those connections and those relationships can be vast and surprising. Think of the other story we heard earlier, the one from Acts. That shows us just how all-encompassing this love can be. So Philip was called by God to go and share this good news with an Ethiopian eunuch. There couldn't have been a person who was more of an outsider to the faith than this person, this Ethiopian eunuch. He was a foreigner in a different land. His very identity meant that he was always ritually unclean, and he was a royal court official, meaning that most frequently his loyalty was given more to an earthly power than a heavenly one. The most outside person you can imagine, and yet that is where Philip was called to go. That's whom God wanted to hear the good news. That's who received this gift of baptism, this gift of the good news, when he looks over and says, "Look, there is water," because he was drawn to that gift and then receives that gift. Philip didn't turn the Ethiopian away because he was different. 1 John doesn't say that we are to just love those who we like or who we agree with. And Jesus didn't say that there were different vines and we all keep to our own little trellis. Right? Like last night, I didn't stop people at the door and ask them if they were Lutheran or even if they were Christian before they came in. I mean, when I say that, even saying that sounds completely absurd. And yet so many things that we do are often only available to a certain or exclusive group of people. But thanks be to God that Jesus' victory over death through the Easter cross allows us to live a rooted and connected life of love, honoring what Jesus said this morning when he said, "My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples." And so may you always remain rooted. Amen.